team. Welcome to episode 112 of Transition Talk, where we talk about dental transitions and how to navigate the sometimes messy path to practice ownership. If you're listening and you have not listened to episode 111, then please go back and listen to part 1 of an incredible series that my darling co-host, Charles Loretto, has interviewed CWA's financial planner, Zane Harris. In that episode, we really are focusing on what happens post-close, right? You finally take these big steps to own your own practice. There's a lot to do. If you thought there was a lot that happened in the transition space before close, there's even more that needs to happen at and after close. And so in this 2-part series, in part 1, Zane walked us through with Charles what to do at close and kind of those first 30 days before you close, so you set yourself up for success. And in part 2, we are featuring those 2 wonderful gentlemen again, and they're diving into the critical steps to take away within 60 days after closing. So marketing, tax planning, depreciation strategies, vendors, so much great content. So again, if you haven't listened to part 1, go back, pause, listen to that, and then come back here. So without further ado, take it away, Charles.
Well, we are back. Thank you so much, Christy. If you did not listen to episode 111, oh my goodness, did you miss an episode? Go back and listen to that, because if you didn't, you just missed it. Because today, again, we have the amazing Zane Harris. Zane Harris, Cain Watters planner, and I'm here to interview him basically to talk about kind of the post-close, all the critical decisions. And on 111, we tackled a lot of the business decisions, kind of the pre-30 days before close, and kind of the most important decisions about 60 days. We're going to go into some deeper and even some more decisions you got to think about. So welcome back again, Mr. Zane. How are we, sir?
Doing great. Excited to be back.
Now, I mentioned last episode that you are the founder of this 411 podcast, the internal podcast of Cain Watters. Can you tell our listeners just how that just kind of came to be? Kind of like the history of the NDP podcast when Christy and I talked on episode 100, how the NDP relationship and the podcast and our kind of brand all started. Tell us how the 411 got started.
I'm glad you asked me that. So to me, one of the biggest areas of opportunity that Cain Watters has that I've felt like for a while has been when someone signs on to Cain Watters, what they really want is, number one, they do want their relationship with their planner, because that can just be such a deep relationship where the planner really understands how they tick, what motivates them, and how they work as a person, you know, what their personality is like, and just kind of how that plays into their financial plan. But also what they want is they want to be able to tap into the knowledge base of not just that planner and their 100 clients, but the entire 3,500 now clients or so of Cain Watters. And so that's why I started the 411, is basically so we can take the information that we gain from our own consults and our own experiences, and we can put that out into the world of all the other planners in their ears as quickly as possible. And especially because knowledge in the dental space right now just moves so quickly. The landscape is changing. Everything changes. It's almost overnight. And so we're in a different time and different this, that, and it's just ever changing. And so it's just a way to make sure that everyone is on the cutting edge of what is the latest out there in terms of their doctor's specialties and dental in general and that sort of thing.
No, I love it. And I love that we're all about education, even internally that we're doing, because I know that you guys go through so much training throughout the year, and we have these kind of mandatory meetings where all of the planners and associate planners and, you know, call it 80 to 100 CPAs all in a room learning about a certain subject. But there's also just times that you're learning things inside of consults, and that creates a lot of good content and a lot of good messaging that we can kind of share internally. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel like it's actually kind of a good segue, because the last episode that we recorded was on how to set a marketing budget.
Yes. Yeah, you ready? Are you game? You ready
I'm so prepared
to get into this marketing strategy? So we have now closed on the business, and I'm sure there's all different types of, call it, marketing budgets. I'd probably say most clients you probably see have little to no marketing budget. So let's take a new owner. They just purchased the practice. What do you look for? How do you budget this marketing strategy? Do we put 1% or 10% towards marketing? What are you looking at before we even set a budget for that?
Great question, because the first thing I'm going to look at is understanding what's the goal with the practice. So when I say what's the goal with the practice, it is, in the last episode, we took the profit and loss, we digested it, we understood where are the strengths and weaknesses for this specific practice, but then also how that plays into the income that the doctor is making versus their needs, spousal income, if that's there as well. But it's understanding, is this a practice we need to grow? Is it already big enough? Maybe you're having to work a second job, in these early years with this practice while you're trying to grow it. But it's just knowing where are we at right now and what are we trying to get to? And if the answer is we're trying to get to something else, we're trying to grow this practice, then we need to make sure that we have a good marketing strategy set in place where we're actually investing dollars there. Most likely spending more than what the doctor before was spending, because let's be completely honest, in most of these cases, the doctor that's selling a practice to you, they were probably winding down to a certain extent. They're getting a little complacent, maybe their financial plan is taken care of and they're just kind of like slowly wading out into retirement. And this is probably going to be one of the biggest areas of neglect in that type of practice.
Yeah, I can easily see a couple of people. First, a pediatric dentist is going to have little to no marketing. They're just such high in demand. They just need to be next to a pediatrician and in the right area. And this kind of single tooth, just kind of crown and bridge, 70-year-old that just kind of held on, more than likely the dollars are going to be very low. Now, at the same time, let's take a new buyer, maybe 1 year experience, and that practice is doing $700,000. And they can't physically do more than the $50,000 of clinical dentistry that's in that practice a month. I mean, we're not talking about throwing out a 5%, $35,000 marketing budget and strategy to grow the practice when all you can do is maybe the crown and bridge that the single guy that just left the door that you can do, right? So we need to have a strategy. We got to look at new patient flow before and after. We got to look at the procedures and just how much can you do? And when you have just like, I can do it all in front of me, and you can easily do this number, now it's time to think about our strategy. So to me, I think about the internal strategy and I think about external strategy. Internal is obviously free. I like free, Zane. So internal strategy is asking that patient that's already paying you to refer their friends and maybe a Google review. I know that you work with all different types of specialties, and from GPs to, I know you got a lot of specialty clients. What do you look for, and what type of budget would you even set from a percentage or ranges from the external side?
Yeah, from the external side, typically what you're going to see is a good, healthy marketing budget. If you're going to compare yourselves to other, perhaps Cain Watters practices, you're going to see that be somewhere in like the 2 to 3%, 2 to 4% of collections area. If you're trying to grow your practice, then I would suggest going higher than that. Right? Like you need to be separating yourself from everybody else. And so to me, I call that an investment. Like it shows as an expense on your profit and loss, but to me, that's an investment because what is it trying to do? It's trying to earn you income. Okay. It's just like any other type of investment that you could make, real estate or whatever, where it's spitting off income. But obviously the upside of this type of investment is so much higher than like your real estate investment. And so make an investment in your marketing. I have practices that I am trying to grow right now, and I have taken them as high as 10% of collections, but I have only done that if I know that the doctor can afford to do it.
Love it. So there's a budget.
Right.
They're exceeding budget. We're trying to get from $2 million to $3 million. They got these aggressive goals, doing this or that. Maybe they're trying to sell to a private equity. I want to be $4 million. And they live a modest lifestyle. We're above where we need to save.
Yep.
They get excess cash. We're going to throw it back in the business.
100%.
Like a strategy there. What, the other thing I just comment is we need to look at our strategy. What I mean by that is if I'm just throwing in SEO or whatever it is, maybe I'm hiring a company that's helping me, maybe I'm doing direct mail, whatever it is, it's just to measure that result and to be able to measure the number of new patients that are coming through with that marketing effort and not just have $1 million practice and stretch the goal to 5% and 50,000. Where we got 30 new patients a month, which is fantastic. But I want to see it's 30 new patients a month, 20 were internal, and 10 were for external. And then what did those 10 a month external patients, where did they come from the 1 or 2, 3 exercises we did? And what type of patients did we get from that? If those are maybe all on 4 cases because that is what you marketed to, and those are $30,000 to $40,000 cases, of course. Now, all of a sudden, it's a lot easier to justify the marketing dollars that we spent. So just getting a return on that, looking inside that kind of general ledger to see what those vendors are from a marketing perspective and being able to track that through the front desk, to me, super critical.
Yeah, well, I would say probably one of the easiest ways to waste money once you step into the ownership shoes is to not track your new patients, and you really have no idea where they're coming from and what's working and what isn't working. I mean, absolutely, that is one of the easiest way that I've seen doctors just throw money away. You're doing half the work if you are not tracking those new patients. But with marketing, if you've decided that you're ready to invest with it, I've generally seen practices that are trying to grow. There's two different approaches. And, one could just be, I'm going to try and inch my way there, and I'm going to try and not spend and only do X, Y, Z. And then the other is, I'm going to invest and not be afraid to spend and try and get my name out there. And there's two different ways to get to where you're trying to go. And if you spend a lot of money to get there quicker, you're going to end up in a better net worth position than if you just try and inch your way forward. One other thing I will say really quickly is you have to hustle. Like if you're a specialist, you got to put your name out there and go talk to referring doctors, go talk to potential referral relationships. If you're a GP or a pediatric doctor, it's getting out in the community, it's making a name for yourself. And that takes time, but that's what separates a business owner from an associate.
Yeah. And hopefully you're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from dental school debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars in this purchase, and you feel a little hustle in your rear end.
Yeah.
It's called debt, and that forces you to do this. I also say if you don't necessarily feel like God didn't make you a hustler, you hire a hustler for you.
Yep.
Okay. So you got to acknowledge kind of who you are and bring your weaknesses to the front of your face, and then hire your strengths to push you a little bit and push the practice, to
Great.
get this done. So I alluded to vendors, vendor being a marketing person, but there's other vendors that we want to be able to look at. And so now that we purchased the practice, we want to be able to think about its profitability, and we want to look inside the general ledger. I know that when you see clients, that's something that you're very thoughtful, specific about, actually opening up and seeing where that money is spent on a monthly basis, what detail and where it went. So talk to me a little bit about just some of the insight that you may have when you really look into the numbers of the practice.
Yeah, that's great. And, number one, I will say, again, with these practices that are selling, a lot of times you're taking it over from an older doctor. This is probably an area that there was neglect, just like marketing. And so this can be a great opportunity for you who could have bought something at a lower price point because the profitability was lower. You can come in and improve this process and get more profit than what was originally in the profit and loss before you stepped in. But it's really understanding from an ordering standpoint, are you ordering things when necessary? Is the person who's doing the ordering looking for deals? Is it you, your spouse, an office manager? There's buyers groups. Another shameless plug here for the buyers group that we're affiliated with, Elite Dental Alliance. They do excellent work at basically harnessing the buying power of all of our clients and the dental community to get corporate pricing on stuff that you use. So that's a very, very important piece to this is trying to look at, can you get same supplies, cheaper prices?
Yep, love it. Yeah, every single NDP client that closes and new client at Kane Waters, we absolutely hand them off to EDA because it's just impossible to look through every one of these vendors, much less look through them all and negotiate the pricing that they've been able to achieve. Talk about equipment and timing. How do you approach the new client that just says, hey, I need this new piece of technology or equipment? How do you address that, budget that? What questions are you asking them?
Another one that I'm really glad that you asked me. Number one, when there's a relatively big piece of equipment, the biggest question I have is, what does this do for the practice? So what does it do to the top line? What does this do to your earning potential? What does this do to collections? Because, a pitfall that I've seen is the office makeover that I'm sure made the practice better for a doctor to be in on a day-to-day standpoint, but the practice doesn't grow at all. And you take on all this debt and you do this big renovation and absolutely nothing happens. And so what I want to make sure is I want to hear from the doctor that they understand, what is this going to do to grow your collections? Is it a cone beam? Okay, great. Is it some sort of other piece of equipment that it's on its last leg? Okay, I understand that as well. Like that's something that probably needs to happen. But if you're just looking to do more cosmetic stuff in the practice, that's probably something that can wait a few more years till you get a little bit of extra cash flow in. And that's more maybe a want instead of a need.
So you're saying if I'm asking you to get a cone beam and my implant course is next summer, I should probably hold off?
You should probably hold off.
Okay, just making sure. Think about the procedures that you look at in a practice and even like hourly production that you look at, and almost like trying to compare that dentist what type of goal setting do you have, or what type of conversations are you having with the dentist in the practice they just purchased as you kind of assess the overall practice just from a production standpoint, meaning procedure mix that they're doing?
Yeah, so there's probably going to be some things like, let's just take a GP practice and you've got someone who's maybe in their first few years out of dental school. If it's a big GP practice, you're probably not going to be able to do everything that the seller doctor was doing. And so you probably need to have a really good plan on what are the steps that you're going to take to be able to get there as relatively quickly as possible, and understanding what are the courses that you need to take, how much time is that going to take, how much time is it going to take to build each of these things. If you're a GP, just making sure that you understand the plan to expand your procedure mix. Get back to where the other doctor was.
Yeah, and I love too, just like some goal setting to be able to see, hey, to hit these numbers, to work 4 days a week, to your financial plan. This practice was doing $5,000 daily numbers from the doctor, and being able to see, okay, your best day so far has been 4. And so how do we get you into clinical courses to get that kind of average up by the hour and by the day to be able to meet that? I know it's important to you. I know that it's important to us as a firm. I know it's important to the doctor to be able to have this kind of work-life balance. And work-life balance comes, in my opinion, after you work really hard. Okay, really hard through dental school, really hard through the CE that is going to come afterwards, really hard now, in the ownership, and then really hard, more CE, because the people that I have seen that crank ridiculous numbers, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10,000 days, is the ones that have just put the energy and effort on the CE.
I cannot agree with this more.
They're like the ones that are doing 3.5 days a week. They're the ones doing the clinical procedures they want to do. They're the ones with the associate. They're the one that seem the happiest.
Yeah.
So it's just being able to share all of that wisdom and being able to share those experiences with, like, you have to do this. And that's what I love about your role, is because you become this coach, you become this motivator, a storyteller, and you get these relationships with people, and you're able to kind of push them a little bit. So now that they got all this excess cash, Zane, what are your recommendations as far as in the business? What type of operating capital would you generally kind of recommend that these new doctors kind of keep in their operating account?
Great question. I think a general rule of thumb is you want to have cash in the account that's about equivalent to 2 months of the operating expenses of the practice, including debt. If you're an S corporation, we talked about the S corporation in the last episode. So if you missed that, go back and listen to that one. But if you are an S corporation and you want to take your owner's salary that you get paid through W-2 to yourself and take that out of it, that's not a part of this calculation. But all of the other expenses in the practice, about 2 months of the operating expenses would be a really good, healthy number. Really what you need to make sure that you're achieving with this is you are not thinking about, can I make payroll this month? You're not thinking about, can I pay my rent? That's what we need to make sure.
Okay. So plenty of cash. I mean, you're kind of looking at it. You get a couple of months of operating. So in general, talking about the kind of this $1 million practice, we kind of like to see kind of a nice $60,000, $70,000 healthy amount that's just sitting there. And that's okay. Maybe we got a little bit of interest or something that we're kind of earning in the savings that we kind of move over,
Yes, exactly.
Kind of back and forth. So we get a little bit of return there, but we want to have a cushion.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So we are making money. We are printing money now. I always say that when you make money, the biggest issues are taxes. When you make money, the biggest issues are taxes. So I say it because I just think that young buyers don't think about taxes. And state tax, federal tax, FICA tax are all big taxes. So when you take over a practice, and let's say you take them over mid-year, you get somebody, they close in June, January to June, what did they make, right? Maybe as the employee, and now we've got June to December is what they made as an owner. Then you're probably thinking even what the next year looks like. Walk me through just like, I call it the depreciation kind of strategy. I feel this is like the most lack of knowledge out there, the biggest mistake
Huge pitfall.
that I've ever seen, ever.
Has to be.
And it's like no one talks about it.
Yep.
So walk me through, like, I guess there's a strategy with kind of how to depreciate the stuff you just bought, right? So walk me through how you see it.
Yeah, so really quickly, just when we're talking about depreciation, we're basically talking about how you get tax deductions for the things that you purchase. When you buy the practice, the tangible stuff, the stuff you can touch, you get to expense, or you get your taxable income lowered through depreciation. The non-tangible stuff is through amortization. But they're the same thing effectively. But the IRS does allow you with depreciation to accelerate those deductions. And instead of taking them over the typical 5 to 7 years, you can do it all in 1 year. CPAs really like to do this because it makes their clients really happy with them in their first year because they get their taxes back and they have this massive refund because their taxable income is way lower than the actual cash income that they got because they're just making regular monthly loan payments on their debt on this. And so that's really great for 1 year. But then in year 2, it completely flips. And so now the cash income that you're getting from the practice is a lot lower than your taxable income. And so now you're paying taxes on way more income than you received. And it's like that pretty much every year going forward. And so it's a huge pitfall. You're also taking these tax deductions. It drives you into really low tax brackets. And so you're being really ineffective with this. And it's zero tax planning when a lot of times that CPA says this is tax planning. It's not. You're taking those deductions in lower tax brackets. You're not being wise with that, and it's going to get you in trouble.
I'd probably say 9 out of 10 new dentists that I see purchase practice miss this boat. And
Absolutely.
I mean, miss it. And the only way to get it right is to unwind those taxes.
Oh, yeah.
And so now we got to amend. Then we have to think about if you do amend, the IRS is not going to be looking at your return a little bit deeper. So how aggressive were we? So this is a big, big thing to get right. And there is an absolute strategy here. The best way I can explain it is you made $100,000 as the associate the first 6 months. You're going to make $100,000 the next 6 months. That's $200,000 taxable. And you told your CPA, or the CPA just said, hey, we can do this 179 deduction and I'll take you down where you paid no taxes. And that all seems logical. If someone says, do you want to buy a business and pay no tax? The answer is yes. But again, what I love about what we do is we've got to educate you and say, well, what's the consequence of that? That's what you should be asking.
Absolutely.
What other strategy is there, CPA? I know we can do this over a 5 or 7 year period. What would be the benefit of maybe doing it that way? Okay. Because now, based on us looking at the practice, and we can see the practice is going to yield us $400,000. We see you just got married at the end of the year. We see that he or she's going to make another couple of $100,000. I mean, what's our strategy? Well, we took all our strategy on year 1. We got no strategy in year 2. We're left holding the bag with a bunch of taxes.
Yep.
So, man, this is absolutely like something you just have to get right. All right, so on to personal. I know that half of what you do is personal financial planning. So let's think about this young doctor, student loans, trying to get a home. Walk me through guiding them through some critical decisions here.
Yeah. So number one, I would say on the home purchase, when you buy a practice, a lot of times banks are going to want to see 2 years of tax returns with you as a business owner before they underwrite a loan for you to buy a home. And that's something that a lot of times people don't understand on the front end. And so they buy this practice, they're making more money, and then they want to go buy the house. And it's like, oh, I can't buy a house anymore. And so I definitely try and have that conversation with people on the front end. If you're going to be a new business owner, you can buy a practice before you buy a house.
But you can't buy the house after you buy the practice.
Correct.
For 2 years.
Yeah. So a bank will underwrite a loan for buying a practice right after you on the house, because the bank underwriting the practice, whether it's rent or a mortgage, they don't necessarily care if they're underwriting a practice. But on the flip side, a bank that's underwriting a house wants to see stability of income. So they're not going to loan you the money for the mortgage if you just bought a practice, because they're going to want to see a few years of tax returns there.
Let's say it this way. So I think what you're saying is if you're trying to buy a house at the same time that you're going to close on a new business, be aware. It's much harder to purchase a home within that kind of first 2 years of closing the practice. Is that correct?
100% it is.
Okay. Now the downside is, as the associate, maybe you made $200,000. Maybe you're going to qualify for a $500,000 house as the associate. So the upside is, now that I'm a practice owner, maybe the practice is going to yield me $300,000 to $400,000 a year. Well, now that will qualify me for maybe $1 million home. And so it's kind of listening to that person and trying to make a really quick decision almost before they close of, okay, what makes sense to you? And generally what I'll tell new home buyers are, you're going to want the bigger house.
Yeah.
And you're going to want it, I would say, probably the first year after you start realizing you're making twice as much money.
Yeah.
Now you're selling the house. Now you're paying the realtor fees to get out of the deal. So if possible, we can be patient, close on the practice, invest back in the practice, grow it, make it efficient, get a couple years tax return, and let's build an amazing house that we're probably going to stay in for 20 years.
Yep.
And where is it going to be? Right next to your practice, because again, that's where I want you to be. You leave a practice and go see the kids real quick for lunch and come right back. It's important to be very near your practice, just from a work-life balance thing with family.
community standpoint too.
Yep. Amen. Great point. Okay. Student loans, I know. So how do you address student loans? And it's like their emotion is I got to get this thing paid off. How do you kind of work with them, and what kind of goals you typically see and set for them on student loans?
Yeah, really good question, because this is definitely going to fall under something where it's like, a lot of times your debt is going to be some sort of asset backed. So for instance, your practice loan is going to be collateralized by the practice, or your home mortgage is going to be collateralized by your house. Or maybe if you've bought the building, it's collateralized by the value of the building. Student loans, they're not collateralized by anything anymore. What they've allowed you to do is go earn income, but at this point, they have no collateral. And I think that scares people, which I totally understand. But what you should also understand is just because they're not collateralized doesn't mean that you need to be paying them down.
Yep.
I don't like paying them down before you buy a practice, just because the bank's going to want to see liquidity. But even after, there's so many other things that you can do that can get you in a better net worth position than paying down the student loans. And so I do think it's important to work with somebody on what your strategy is there.
Yeah, I mean, own the practice, let's grow it, make a lot of money, let's tax plan, again, at a 30+% tax bracket between state and federal. Let's get pension planning going. Again, that's a big tax deduction. And then we'll focus on kind of lastly, that student loan. Again, 6% interest, non-deductible. It's obviously a negative thing, but I think there's just as long as they can see it and remove a little emotion that, hey, we're on track and we're making really good decisions versus trying to pay it off and not have the liquidity to maybe buy the real estate or get in a good position to buy their practice. So awesome. One more question I wanted to ask too, same thing on the liquidity side that we talked about earlier on the business. Is that kind of similar to on the home front as far as what type of liquidity, kind of a safety net that we'd want to see at home?
Ish. So I would look at it as taking into account 3 months of your personal living expenses. So I said 2 months in the practice, you've got income from the practice coming in. Like, let's say if you're going to be disabled, there's a little bit, I guess, of income coming in, like especially if you got hygiene department, things like that. From a personal standpoint, the reason I say 3 months is just because typically on your disability policies, there's going to be a 90-day wait.
Got it.
And so, that kind of just helps service your expenses until that policy kicks in. And that's a good rule of thumb right there.
Awesome. Zane, you have been amazing. You're such a wonderful resource here at Kane Waters, wonderful resource to all of our NDP clients. Appreciate everything you do at the firm and for us, and you've been an amazing guest here. And we welcome back Christy next time. But I got to tell you, I like doing this sometimes without Christy. It's just fun. I feel like I'm in charge. When Christy's here, she just kind of tells me what to do. I show up, but I really feel like it's her show and I'm just the guest. But without Christy, I feel like I'm
That's
leaving.
right.
So it's been fun, buddy. I appreciate it. Thanks for everything, okay?
Man, this was great.
All right, we'll see you guys.
All right, team. Again, what an incredible episode. Sorry to miss it, but felt like you guys hopefully learned a ton over the last 2 episodes. And that's all we have for today. Thank you again for joining us on episode 112 of Transition Talk. As always, make sure to share the transition love with those who may not know of us yet. And of course, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time.